Well, thank you very much, Simon, for that gracious introduction. And thank you to the Society for inviting me. I always enjoy very much coming back to Canada, not least because my first teaching assignment as a visiting assistant professor was at UBC in 1983-84, which I'm shocked to admit next year will be 40 years ago. I think I'm coming down with a bit of a cold, so you'll have to excuse me. My voice is getting hoarser than normal. I feel very comfortable in this auditorium. It feels just like a university lecture hall with 90% of the students sitting as far away as possible. Tonight I'm going to give you a rundown of Chinese developments in astronomy from the earliest period down to the early medieval period, that is shortly after the beginning of the imperial period. This is my specialization, this period. Here you see some pottery shards from the Yangshan culture dating from about 5000 BC or BCE. And it seems clear that some of them are astronomically inspired. Then we get to something that's actually astonishing to me. This is also from the late Neolithic, from Anhui province, which is in more or less in the middle of China, between the Yellow River and the Yangtze. This is a jade turtle, model of a turtle, and inside it is this plaque. It is really the initiation of this notion of the sacred turtle as a model of the cosmos. And we'll see more about that later. This is very interesting, as I note here. This kind of graphological representation in the 3rd millennium BC is rather impressive. Next, I wanted to show you this equally spectacular discovery from Puyang, which is in the western part of Shandong province. What I like to call a cosmo priest burial. This individual lying facing north, as close to due north as I guess you could come in 3000 BC. And on his left and right are mussel shell mosaics of dragon and the tiger, which later become iconic representatives of the East and the West. The dragon, because of its riverine, watery associations, and the tiger, because of its association with the inland west, mountainous west, and so on. Here is a diagram of the tomb, and you can see this is true north. This is compass north. This is sort of freehand true north. And one of the really interesting things about it, besides the fact that the cosmo priest is facing north, is the odd placement of this acolyte who was no doubt sacrificed at the same time the priest was buried. The priest is a little bit off north, But who knows what disturbances have occurred, especially earthquakes in this area of China. So we don't know really how accurately he was placed. But the north edge of the tomb is only 5 degrees off. And this is very interesting because that means that the orientation of this individual is 119 degrees, which is the azimuth of winter solstice sunrise. So clearly, this is emblematic of very deep interest in the sky. Here you have examples of the depiction of the tiger and the dragon 3,000 years later. So it's, to me, quite astonishing that this iconography and its astronomical association at Puyang already began 3,000 years earlier. It's really, to me, quite astonishing. These, as I mentioned, are eave tiles. And you see, these are the end tiles on a building. And here you have the other iconic creatures associated with the cardinal directions. The vermilion bird, who we'll meet later, and also the sacred tortoise and these snakes, which are a rather late addition, represent the north. So here you have east, west, south, and north. Next, I'd like to show you another truly spectacular. If you turn the Earth virtually anywhere in China, you find something spectacular. It's quite astonishing. This is from a location of Taosi, which is, if you know the course of the Yellow River, it makes this great bend in north of the province of Shanxi, and then across the North China Plain to Shandong, either north or south of Shandong. This location is on the downward part of the Great Bend of the Yellow River. It's an urban settlement, and next to the elite portion of the city, there are some burials in this area. But most interestingly is this, what is now referred to as a spirit terrace, in Chinese a Lingtai, which was the common name for observing platforms for astronomy, things astronomical. What is fascinating about this is there was a very obvious observation point, and the remains, the stumps of these pedestals, so to speak, which created all of these apertures. There are astronomers in the audience. You may have some suggestions later about what was going on here. We'll see in a minute. As you see, there are 12 of these pillars with 12 apertures. Not all of them capture the sun or the moon, as we'll see in a second. There are really only 10 functional apertures. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every bit of this, but it's very interesting that the aperture number 1 missed completely the sun and the moon, and aperture number 12 barely made it. This looks to me, here you have the dates of the sun's appearance at the midline of each of the apertures, and the dates. And here the number of days between the sun's appearances in each aperture. And as you can see from these durations, if they were trying to come up with a regular observation scheme, they didn't realize that the sun moves a great deal quicker, about 6 times faster at the around the equinoxes than around the solstices. So they ended up with this very uneven durations. And so this looks to me like an experiment, an initial try, probably to reconcile the solar, the tropical year with the 12 lunar months, which calendar appeared for sure, we know, in the Shan dynasty about 600 years later, at least 600 years later. But it's also very interesting that we know that about this time, there was a 10-month solar calendar in use among some of the regional peoples in the north of China. You have to remember that 3,000 or 4,000 years ago, China was not the military civilization that we understand now. China was, the north of China in particular, but also the south, was populated by a large number of ethno-linguistic groups. Not all of them Semitic, as we say, not all of them Chinese speaking. And they had all of them distinct cultural aspects, not least pertaining to astronomy. It turns out that a great many of the technological innovations that appear in China in the 2nd millennium BC, for example, wheat cultivation, horsemanship, horse breeding, and chariot warfare, all came into China from the West through introduced by these peripheral peoples who also play a very important political role in China down through the 1st millennium BC until China was thoroughly unified. Something else you also have to keep in mind is that in China, well, everywhere, from the 20th century BC, the beginning of the Xia dynasty, and all the way down to the Han and even later, there was no pole star because of precession. In the early 4th millennium BC, there was a very good pole star, Fuban, but by this time, the celestial pole had precessed away from it. So the nearest bright star was probably Kochan in the Big Dipper, but it was around 6 degrees from the pole, so it was obviously not the center. But in Chinese traditional thinking philosophy, the fact that that the whole cosmos was controlled by something here in the void, in the emptiness at the center of the sky, was a very important and really quite startling insight. And it leads to some very interesting speculation, especially in Taoist thinking later, about the utility of the void, the utility of emptiness and stillness, and so on. Now we get to another of the most interesting and unprecedented discoveries made in China, and that is this event. This is the most spectacular conjunction in human history. All 5 planets within a circle of about 4 degrees. There has been nothing like it, nothing quite as spectacular since. The Chinese certainly saw it and remembered it. And even if it is represented in imagistic language, it is explicitly mentioned in one ancient text, the Molda, from the latter half of the first millennium BC. What you have here on this constellation called Ding, will appear again and again. The 5 planets having followed the ecliptic across the Milky Way, the Sky River in Chinese thinking, through the tail of the Dragon constellation, and right above the Turtle constellation, which we know as Corona Australis. This event becomes absolutely paradigmatic and tremendously culturally influential for the next 2,000 years. In Chinese tradition, the event is described variously. There are 2 regional traditions, apparently. One attributing the event to a so-called dragon horse emerging out of the Yellow River, and the other relating to the lore, I think, which appeared out of the Low River. And in the traditional texts, this was a revelation, a hierophany, delivered to the founder of the Xia dynasty, known as Yu the Great, who was also the queller of the Great Flood and the founder of the first hereditary dynasty in Chinese history. So here you have the mention of the numbers through 9 appearing on, actually appearing on both of them. And this later comes to be recognized. This representation, of course, is from so bad. This is the 12th century. This is not contemporaneous with the event by any means. But this becomes numerologically a central aspect of Chinese number thinking, and as you see, because it's sort of magical, any direction you sum the numbers, you get 15, which is why it's the magic square. This had to have impressed people as quite magical. So, beginning with that event in particular, the turtle-shaped cosmos, this spectacular planetary conjunction, it becomes well established in China that things that transpire in the heavens are not simply coincidental. They have meaning, and they need to be interpreted. And the interpretation saw of that first spectacular conjunction was that it was actually in the text it says it was writing on a jade scepter that was conferred on Yu the Great by the supernal Lord who dwells in the pole, instructing him, commanding him, mandating him to govern the country. So astrolomans then become the transient effects of materia vitalis, chi, which, if you know anything about things Chinese, especially geomancy, for example, feng shui, then you've heard of qi, which is makes up everything. You and me and paper and stone and everything is qi. And qi is material vitalis because it's animate. It's animate material substance. So it's interesting that later, when the Chinese come up with the 5 elemental phases, much like the ancient Greeks, they don't include air because air is already qi, right? I mentioned here, show you a turtle plastron. Turtle is sacred, of course, and in the Shang Dynasty, it becomes the preeminent mode of communication with the spirits and the ancestors. These are inscribed oracular inquiries or statements, which then are confirmed or disconfirmed. The red hot bronze poker is applied to the reverse side and into these pits that are drilled on the reverse side, and you get a sound. And a crack appears, and then it's the interpretation of these cracks which you see, which later become the character for prognostication boom or oracles. And then the text is inscribed. The text of the proposal that was answered is inscribed. So here again, the important role of the turtle as a means of communicating with the invisible world. But also, it turns out that the most popular turtle that was used for this purpose has exactly 9 scutes, with a 5 surrounded in the center. So this is clearly, to me, the origin of what I just showed you with the magic square and so on. And it also becomes, these 9 become the 9 provinces of ancient China. And the seam here represents the Yellow River, and these numbers relate to the provinces in the same relationship, an analogical relationship, as those provinces positioned in relation to the Yellow River. So heaven instructs with starry signs, suspends images manifesting the auspicious and inauspicious, and the learned man makes of himself a semblance. In other words, he takes these as instruction of how to be learned, how to behave. And here again, the mention of the writing. The sage takes them as his model. When are we by the dragon? Well, a little bit more about Chinese dragons. Here you have a couple of examples of very nice Shang Dynasty bronzes with bottle-horned dragons represented. And here you see how the character for dragon was written, inscribed on those oracle poems, and here how it was reproduced in inscriptions on those bronzes, like the one I just showed you, the 2 I just showed you. This is the modern character for dragon. So you see, these are pictographic. This is hardly pictographic. So there has been considerable evolution over time. The dictionary, the short ones here for the dictionary by Xu glosses the character. At autumn equinox, it conceals itself in the watery void. At spring equinox, it climbs into the sky. And so here again, mentioning the seasonal astral associations, and then reminding us that the imperative is to stay in step with the seasons by watching the stars. Here is the bottom portion of the Dragon constellation, which is in all about 75 degrees long from Virgo to Scorpius. Here again, the same representation. Here is another shining bronze. On its side, you have both an alligator and the dragon. And I'm persuaded that it's the behavior of the dragon that you just heard described in the lexicon sort of mimics the seasonal behavior of the alligator in its activity during the spring, summer, fall, and then hibernating through the winter. So I'm persuaded that these roundels that appear on the bronze are, I think, I'm convinced, are supposed to represent the constituent stars of the Dragon constellation. And the most important one here, this is a knob on the top of the bronze. This is the fire star, so-called Antares in Scorpius, which also plays a very important role in seasonal, as a seasonal aster in the Greek scheme of things. For example, in Hesiod's works and days. Virgo also, Spica in Virgo, of course, is Virgo the Virgin, it means year of grain in Latin, and it was also appears in the myth, of course, of Hades spiriting away Persephone from her mother Demeter to the underworld, and then Zeus mediating a solution whereby she returns to her mother part of the year. Persephone is the new growth, the new crop, and Demeter is the old growth, the old crop. So Persephone and Antares disappear after the harvest and reappear in the spring. So it's kind of like all the way across the northern hemisphere. This was probably in use. This is one of the 9 dragons painted by Chandron in the Song Dynasty. It's my absolute favorite because of the expression on this long. I call him the sly dragon. The Chinese dragon, it's important to point out, was not like the Western fire-breathing dragon that captured princes and fought with knights, St. George, and so on. The dragon was an awesome and unapproachable creature, but it was also extremely important and benevolent in its activities in bringing clouds and rain through the agricultural year. So it was not at all as scary and intimidating quite as in the West. I'll say a few words about the Book of Changes. I see a show of hands. How many people know what the Book of Changes is? Okay. It's the most important oracular text in the Chinese, among the Chinese classics. It's very, very high up in terms of respect and importance. It's in some respects, parts of it clearly, to my mind, started out as a farmer's almanac. And in the case of the first hexagram scan, there are 64 hexagrams, each one comprising 6 lines, each line with a line statement, and it's on the basis you do a manipulation, a numerical manipulation, and you identify a hexagram that applies to the precise moment in time where you are. And it identifies the exact complexion of the time. And the line statements inform you as to the best way to behave at this moment in time. But in the case of the first hexagram, Chen, all of these mentions of dragons in these lines have an association with the sky. So that the second line, dragon appearing in the fields, refers to the appearance of the horns of the dragon here you have Spica in early spring, which told the farmer that this is the time to get ready the fields, to start plowing the fields and get ready for the spring planting. Virtually everyone, certainly in the rural areas of China, knows the expression long time ago. In the second day of the second month, the dragon raises his head. Still to this day. And then, fourth line, sometimes the dragon is leaping in the void, and here at vernal equinox, you see it vertically soaring into the sky. Summer solstice, here is the dragon stretching all the way across the sky, all night long. The soaring dragon is in the sky. And then when you get to late summer, early autumn, the imperious dragon, the reluctant dragon, you see how he's doing a belly flop into the horizon. He's not too thrilled about disappearing. He doesn't really want to disappear, but he's already headless. And I didn't include here the autumnal equinox, by which time he's gone. Okay, now something about how the stars, the role they played in the political culture of China. We saw that the earliest conjunction of the planets with that bestowed the mandate of heaven on Yu the Great in 1953 BC, established the precedent for this kind of thing. The next most spectacular of these events occurred in 1059. And it signaled the conferral of legitimacy on the Zhou dynasty, an upstart Western power, erstwhile subordinates to the Shah. And the texts say that one of these jade scepters of authority was delivered to the Zhou altar, above the Zhou altar to the ancestors, in the beak of the vermilion bird. And I guess it was in 1981 when I found this particular event in a text that I didn't have the software. There was a huge volume of planetary longitudes edited by Stallman and Gingrich. And so it was a matter of paging every 10 days, matter of paging through that until because no one knew, and no one has known for 2,000 years, or more than 2,000 years, when the Zhou dynasty was founded. So when I discovered this particular conjunction, again, very impressive, and then dialed back to identify 2,000 years ago what the longitudes of these planets, where they were. And I discovered that it confirmed this text. I almost fell out of my chair. It was so astonishing. And this was as a graduate student. So this is the event that really set me off on the trip that I've taken through the history of Chinese astronomy. A little bit about field allocation, political astrology. Here you have North China, Shandong, and here you have the original nine provinces of China in the second and first millennia BC. The scheme, the astrological scheme that the Chinese devised, and I mentioned already that the Zhou space was in the south. I didn't mention the south, but was Yong. And then you have the north and northwest and so on. But the important thing to note is that the Yellow River here, the geographic orientation of the Yellow River really has nothing to do with the directions that are assigned to the provinces. As you see here, Shandong is north and Shanxi is south. The reason for this is, of course, because the Milky Way is precedent setting. I mean, the Milky Way determines the cosmological directions of the provinces for astrological purposes. So you have these spaces in the sky assigned to the nine provinces, and as things, anomalous events in particular, occur in these spaces, and they have to be interpreted in terms of what it means for those particular kingdoms as they later become in the Warring States period, for example. China really brings 12 contending kingdoms. Oops, I wanted to say one more thing about that, and this is the pre-imperial scheme with Milky Way as the analog of the Yellow River, or vice versa. And this is a short-lived attempt to convert to the political reality of the imperial period, when China, for much of its early imperial period, was besieged by peripheral peoples who were constantly trying to invade, particularly in the north and the northwest. As luck would have it, the foreigners were assigned to the north and the west, which is Yin, and China was the east and the south, which is Yang. Fortunately, as we'll see, because Yang is sort of male principle, whereas Yin is the recessive female force. So it wouldn't have done, obviously, to have China be Yin. Celestial hierophany in the cosmic capitals. You know Ding now, right? This is where that remarkable conjunction in 1953 was, just south of Alpha Legacy. Ding, this square, which in 28 lunar lodges now is divided into two. These two stars are called Align the Hall, and these two are the eastern wall. This is a recollection of the practical significance of this thing as for orientation on the pole. And as you see here, it's very clearly stated. When Ding culminates at dusk, you establish the directions. To the south, observe Ding, and to the north, target the pole. Why was this important? Because for high-value structures like temples and tombs and so on, you had to bring down true north from the Supreme Lord. True orientation on the celestial pole. It had to be sort of sanctified in this way. So here again, you have this memorable event, and what I was just mentioning. And one of the interesting things about in the first imperial capital that was created by the first emperor, who unified China, Qin Shi Huangdi, he built the imperial capital at the time, Xianyang, straddled the river. And so he built this causeway called the Gudao, which is sort of a zigzag shape where these things are done. You can still see them still today in China. And that really replicates Cassiopeia. So the pathway to being crosses the celestial, the sky river goes through here. So it's crossing the river and leading you down to the Puyang Palace, which was on the south bank of the Wei River. And here you have the Wei River running southwest to northeast, more or less like the Yellow River, and the analogy to the Yellow River. Except now, this is a new deal. This is the first emperor forever for China, and whose dynasty is going to endure forever. And so things had to be created anew. So this Xianyang capital, which included this part across the river, was now the cosmic center. So the cosmic capital of the Qin dynasty effectively replaces the Yellow River with the Wei River to create a new cosmic center. This is that cosmic center today, the city of Xi'an. And one of the very interesting throwbacks here is that a major avenue, North-South Avenue, through the city of Xi'an is still called the Meridian Avenue because it preserves the memory of the North-South Causeway from the Xianyang Palace to the top of the southern mountain. But it also is the beginning of the so-called straight road that runs 500 miles from Xianyang to Jiuya, near the present-day Baotou and Inner Mongolia. Mountain analogy, of course, would be the prime meridian. But the engineering feat that the straight road represents is absolutely extraordinary. Not only because it's monumental, it was 30 meters wide, but also because it fused the same straight line, heedless of all natural obstacles in its path. So not following river courses and so on, the cheapest and easiest way to go, but straight. This was typical of the first emperor. There were no compromises. Straight over the mountains, sort of like the Great Wall, if you've seen pictures of the Great Wall. And so the engineering that was required to sort of buttress the road when it was crossing gulches and so on is really mind-boggling. So here you have Ding as the celestial archetype. By this time, it comes to be known as the Celestial Temple, and we saw how it had the eastern wall and the align the hall are the two lunar lodges that comprise it. And here it is now in the first month of the year, which is now changed to November, right? Not 6 weeks after the winter solstice, but November. Julius Caesar, right? Things have to be redone. And so at that time, the view from the ramparts of the Shenyang Palace would have been something like this. You have the Milky Way and, in the sky, the Wei River down below, ending perpendicular, straight ahead. This continues. The Qin dynasty was overthrown. The first empire was overthrown in 206 BC. A long story. The Han dynasty was founded in 206. The capital of Chang'an was built by Han Gaozu, is his name, the High Emperor, the High Ancestor of the Han Dynasty, in 196, or yeah, circa 195, 196. And here you have a mention of the fact that the south of the city wall was in the shape of the Southern Dipper, which is this kind of the constellation formed by these stars in Sagittarius. The north was in the shape of the Northern Dipper. That's why to this day, people still refer to the city wall on the hot capital as the Dipper Wall. And this is written in the 2nd century CE. So this is 400 years after it was built. The walls are still called the Dipper Wall. One early solution had the Dipper sort of facing that way, which would have put the pole outside the capital, which I think is unthinkable. The pole has to have been in the capital. And so I think this is more likely what was the intended. The Wei River runs through here, of course. So that's why the capital is not perfectly square, but it also the structure to be built this way. And here you have the Southern Dipper in Sagittarius. So the celestial capital is here. Yes, well. Now one of the most important duties of the emperor, certainly from the Han Dynasty onward, was to conduct seasonal rites, ceremonies in a location called the Mingtan, the luminous hall. And the structure, as you see, was a round roof and a square base, replicating the concept of the term that we saw, but also the notion that the heavens are like a parasol or a dome, and the earth is square. And it had 12 rooms, 3 on each side, and the emperor would move from room to room with the seasons, eating the seasonal produce and carrying out rites to that particular cardinal direction. So this was a very important sort of commemoration and recognition of the duty to adhere to the celestial cycle. Here in the 5th century, you have this remarkable also event. Within the columns and beneath the silk atrium of the luminous hall built at this time were installed, well, you can read it yourself, pale green silk. Looking up, it looked like the sky, with the polar asters and lunar lodges. And it was a mechanical model. So it turned with the seasons, right? So that's why I call it the world's first planetarium. I don't know if anything like this was ever built anywhere else. word about cosmology. Many questions were, of course, raised by the astronomers already in the Han Dynasty about the circular heaven and the square Earth model. One memorable philosopher put the question, well, but so how are they joined at the corners if the top was round and the bottom was square? So alternatives were suggested for the next 300 or 400 years, and these are probably the most advanced of them, certainly the most advanced of them. And you can see for yourself that heaven is empty and void of the chi, right? And so on. The one that I like the best is this one because it's so poetic. And this is actually from, you see the discoverer of precession in the 4th century, who says, I think that the heavens are infinitely high, and that the space below the earth is unfathomably deep. Undoubtedly, the form of the heavens above is in a permanent state of rest, and the body of the earth below also remains quiet and motionless. One envelops the other, and if the one is square, so is the other. If the one is round, so must the other be. They cannot differ as to squareness and roundness. The luminaries are distributed, each pursuing its own course, like the high and low tides of the sea and its rivers, and like the thousands of living creatures which sometimes come out and sometimes hide away. Here again, a direct reference to phenology, that is, the behavior of various aspects of the natural world, whether it's the behavior of animals through the course of the year, or the budding of trees, of spring flowers, and so on. All of this is coming together in one great scheme. So summing up, what do we have? We have a system that, a philosophy that prioritized timeliness and harmonious conformity with, from phenology, which I just mentioned, and which we saw in the astral calendar in the Book of Changes, prognostication to metaphysics and ethical philosophy. The mandate is to effortlessly emulate the Tao, or way of heaven, as the model for governance in individual conduct. That's where the ethical philosophy comes in. So everything began with the Supreme One, Tai, the great monad. From it sprang yin and yang. And maybe I should mention that yin and yang originally are also this kind of phenological reference. In the earliest days, before it got this meaning, yin referred to the north side of the mountain slope, and yang to the south side of the mountain slope. That's why so many cities in China are something yang, because that means the city is on the north bank of the river facing south. So these are really terrestrial references, and then are sort of expanded and extrapolated to become the two binary forces whose interchanging influences through the course of the year drive all of the changes in the world. Oops. And then much later comes the 5 elemental phases, which I mentioned. And as I said, there is no air because all of these are chi. This scheme becomes the doctrinal frame of reference that can explain all things, from composition of the cosmos to the working of the organs of the body, the systems of the body, to Chinese medicine, and so on. Everything in the cosmos can be, every phenomenon phenomenon can be explained by means of this square frame of reference. To this day, of course, there's Western medicine also in China, but there are still firm believers in Chinese traditional medicine, which I may mention, discovered the smallpox vaccination 500 years before William Jenner. So Chinese traditional medicine, pharmacology now is being probed very deeply by Western pharmacologists looking for other uses of Chinese herbal cures. Initially, in cosmology, a dome-like heaven above a flat square Earth, as we saw, evolves to a point, but then is stymied from further speculation during the imperial period, but not progress in polar equatorial astronomy and calendrics. Stymied because the path of advancement, the social advancement in China was through education, and the education was in the Chinese classics. Memorization of the Chinese classics, study of Confucian philosophy primarily, writing, poetry, and essays in a particular style, and so on. And you became the only way to social advancement, or the best way to social advancement, which meant everything to your family, was through a civil service examination, which offered admission to the imperial administration. And if you got the top degree in that examination, then your family's future was assured. So that being the sort of the doctrinal curriculum, there wasn't much room for speculation about cosmology. Any questions?
Thank you very much for that excellent presentation. I certainly learned a lot. So we're going to be doing a Q&A now. I have the Zoom meeting open on this computer, and we'll also take some questions from the crowd here. So we'll do one and one. So if you have a question, just raise your hand. And David, if you don't mind repeating that question, just so the people on Zoom can hear it as well. So please, anybody in the crowd, just raise your hand and we'll take your question.
Yeah, so a drink there.
Yes, you can hear that the voice is coming. Okay.
Your last comment intrigued me because I was sort of wondering, there's not a lot of mention of the sun. There's, with various Western European astronomy, sun-centered universes, Earth-centered universes. How did they feel about that in the early millennia?
The sun?
Yeah, we hear a lot of it.
Question is, how did the Chinese think in the earliest period about the sun? Well, they were very close observers of the sun. The first solar eclipses are already recorded in the Shamawaga bones because they were distressing. And of course, they created a great deal of alarm. And so one of the typical responses was for everybody to come out of their houses and bang, pots and pans, and make as much noise as they possibly could to scare off, frighten off whatever it was that was eating the sun. The Chinese had a very, very early on had a technique for a pan of ink so that you wouldn't damage your eyes, and they ended up being able to see very small partial and annular eclipses and recording them. The sun, being the preeminent yang force, of course, was identified with the emperor. So anything untoward affecting the sun, whether it was a halo or an eclipse, it reflected on the emperor, and it had to be prognosticated. It would be reported by the office of the scribe astrologer, and part of the reason, an important part of the reason for keeping China has the most complete astronomical records of phenomena of all kinds, going back farthest and most detailed, precisely because it's a matter of national security. Right? You had to figure out, based on where things happened, as I said, what the consequences were, what it meant, and whether the emperor had to take some action. So the office of the scribe astrologer had to make recommendations based on a consultation of the prognostication texts, which basically comprise records of all of the occurrences that might have a bearing on this one, and then come up with a recommendation.
Thanks, that helps a lot.
Okay.
All right, thank you for that answer. Let me take one online, and you don't have to repeat this one because I'm hooked up to the Zoom mic as well. So somebody asks, Ding is Pegasus, and that is now called Tianma. Was there a Tianma in older and intrinsically Chinese culture?
Oh, now you're touching on a paper that I'm right in the middle of. I'm trying to assemble evidence, whether or not there was an association of dating with a quadruped. It turns out that these four iconic emblems of the seasons, animal emblems of the seasons, in that the turtle snake, is quite late. And as I mentioned before, there were regional variations on much of this. And in one variation, it appears there are traces that suggest that the north was associated with the unicorn, which is a very strange combination of a horse and a serpent of some kind. And so my answer at this point is maybe, but I can't really say with any definitively yet. It's the suggestion is there. It's possible that it was at least because in the if you remember in the river diagram in that one regional version, there was a so-called dragon horse and the turtle. And that dragon horse, the appearance of the conjunction of 1953 was smack in the middle of the northern quadrant of the heavens. So pieces are falling into place, but I can't say with assurance yet that that was the case.
Great. Any questions in the crowd? You can put up your hand. I see a gentleman in the white shirt there.
You can talk a little bit about comments.
Comments? Yes. There were lots. There are, I have translated with colleagues in China in a book called East Asian archaeoastronomy. All of the records of comets and meteor showers in that area recorded in China. Comets were typically not good. They were a warning of some kind, and they required, they were a message that things were not going right in the kingdom. And from the very early days, already from the Han Dynasty, once this scheme became established, that astral phenomena were commentaries on how things were going in the world below, it became required of the emperor at some point, if the interpretation was such that things are not going well and it's the fault of the court or the officials, then the emperor was obligated to make a public mea culpa. It's all my fault. I'm going to reform. We will improve the administration and we will do better. So that's in a nutshell. In Chinese records, the commonality is recorded for sure all the way back to the 3rd century BC, every appearance.
Wow, that's really cool. I really like that about Ali's comment there. Let me take another question online. Somebody asks an interesting question. Did they develop mathematics to help with their cosmological prognostications?
Not really. Only really in the 18th. There's a mathematical operation that you have to perform to come up with a numerical result that tells you whether each line of that hexagram is yin or yang. And then whatever that result is, then you go to the text and consult that hexagram. But as far as astrology or cosmology otherwise, in the Han Dynasty, yes, there were very like in classical Greece, efforts to compute the size of the spheres of the planets, which were not crystalline spheres. I shouldn't say spheres. They weren't crystalline spheres like the orbits of the planets. And the height of the heavens, the size of the Earth, and so on. One of these is called the Jobi Swanti, which has been thoroughly translated and explained by a sonologist by the name of Christopher Cohn at the Needham Research Institute in Cambridge. So if you look up Chris Cohen, you'll find that translation of the Jobi Swanti.
Great. Any other questions in the crowd? Anybody have their hand up? Or we'll take another question from Zoom. Oh, is that a question? Perfect.
I'm trying to make sense of the star maps when you're showing the different star patterns. Do I consider like the dragon a constellation and all the smaller patterns as asterisms within it? Like we would say the keystone of Hercules or the belt of Orion?
Yes.
Is that how we do it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So that the dragon is made up of the lunar mansions or lunar lodges, horns, base, chamber, heart, which the middle star is Antares, as I showed. So those are the asterisms comprise the dragon. The same is true of the other creatures, vermilion bird, for example. Stretches from Cancer through Corvus. So these are big constellations.
Great, no, thank you so much. We'll take another one from Zoom. We'll take just a few more questions. Somebody asks about the turtle shells used for augury. They would be written upon and then burned, or burned and then written upon. The cracks show the augury. How is that related to the celestial world in a nutshell?
The relation is, I guess, twofold. One is the propositions are being offered either to the ancestral spirits or to the Supreme Lord or his minions. The five planets were referred to as the five rectified ministers of the Supreme Lord. They don't spell out always the text of the oracular statements don't always spell out to whom it's being addressed. We have to assume that the ancestors, having ascended to that realm, were the intermediaries with the invisible spirits, whichever they may be. But I think the other major connection, of course, is the sacredness of the turtle itself as a replica of the cosmos, in that, so it's already magical in that it represents the cosmos, and so you can communicate with the spirits of the cosmos through it.
Great. Any further questions here in person? Oh, I see one right in the back there. That's going to be a long run for you to get there.
I'll make my way over, and the mic is up this time. Is this yourself?
Yeah, I have a question. What do you think the legitimacy of claim that there's a relation between what's happening in the stars and what's happening down below? Like, do you think there's any legitimate findings in that?
You're talking about astrology.
Yes.
Well, insofar as human behavior is concerned, absolutely, if people are convinced that that's the case. These conjunctions that I referred to, especially the one that, well, both of them, that sort of signal the foundation of dynasties, I didn't mention, but that continues throughout the history of Imperial China. So it's repeated in the Han Dynasty, it's repeated several times in the medieval period. A rebellion, an unsuccessful rebellion that attempted to overthrow the Tang Dynasty by a general called Longshan was also accompanied by such a sign. And in 1524, in the Ming Dynasty as well. And I might say it'll be interesting to see, there's going to be quite a good one in September of 2040. So it will be interesting to see how that one is interpreted. But as far as, if you're asking, do I believe in astrology? Is that your question?
Kind of, yeah.
No. Well, I do believe that, you know, if an asteroid is targeting the Earth, yeah, we're gonna get it.
Yes.
But you know, and if there's a solar storm directed toward the Earth, yeah, for sure, we're gonna know about it. But is California going to fall into the ocean because the five planets gather together in some place? No, I don't think so.
Great, no, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. We'll take one more from online. The Mayans used astrology to help rule their people. So did the Chinese. Are there similarities? And if so, can one generalize further to other early civilizations?
Well, the answer to your last question is absolutely, certainly, for sure. There are so many, after all, if you think about it, I can only really speak to the northern hemisphere, but we have been an intelligent species for a very long time. And after the sun goes down, what do you have to look at? Right? And if there is no exterior lighting, I mean, people have been watching the stars and they try to make sense to understand what's going on and other phenomena as well for what, 500,000 years at least, our species. So, sure, yeah, I'd say everywhere. And actually, if you follow the work of the archaeoastronomy community and cultural astronomy community, there's a website called ISAC, ISAAC, the International Society for Astronomy and Culture, and archaeoastronomy and astronomy and culture. That's where I started getting my introduction to what was going on all over the world. So many of these things are universal. I mentioned just one example of classical Greece and matching up with China.
That's great. And these websites that you're mentioning, we'll put on our social media outlets for your consumption in the future. I know I saw a hand at the back. Oh, one right behind you there, John.
One question refers to your study of ancient artifacts and the ancient writings that you referred to. I imagine that the language Chinese today is very different from what it was 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 years ago. How do you account for the drift and changes over time, and how do you interpret things for which we, today they may not be an analog in the characters of what they were? How do you account for those changes?
Well, that has to do with first off, it has to do with the limited possibilities of a pictographic script. Babylonian in Mesopotamia, Sumerian also started out pictographic. But if you think about it, you run very quickly into limitations with the kinds of things that you can represent with a picture that are not ambiguous. I mean, how do you draw a picture of, well, of course we have emojis today, but as really annoyed or running up the hill or, other actions. It's very difficult. And so very early on in Mayan, in cuneiform in Mesopotamia, in China, very early on, it was discovered that you had to resort to some other methodology. And so what was done was to use some characters to make composite characters with one portion of it, maybe a pictograph representing the category of thing, and the other half representing the pronunciation. And so to this day, probably 85, 90% of Chinese characters are constructed that way. At least 90%, I'd say. So, plus, of course, when people begin to become literate, especially in the ruling class, different states, 12 different states, would have variations in how they wrote the same thing. So one of the things that the first emperor did was to standardize the writing system and also weights and measures, precisely to avoid that. So you can trace a very, in sinology and linguistics, sinological linguistics, you can trace this evolutionary development very clearly all the way up to the present day. We have seen something of the same. If you look at illustrated manuscripts from medieval time, and I mean, how many school children today write cursive? I know there are complaints about it, that kids are forgetting not learning how to write cursive probably. And, when I look at my father's writing, I'm ashamed of my own handwriting. It's just rude. So, things have also changed very much in our own tradition. But there is a system to it. It's not just, 5,000 distinct signs that you have to memorize. They're easily, once you learn this technique, they're analyzable and memorable. So that to this day, I can encounter characters that I've never seen before. And I can guess pretty accurately the pronunciation and go to a dictionary that's organized according to pronunciation without having to resort to the traditional method of counting the strokes and looking at the radical that represents the category plus X number of strokes, and then going to a table at the back of the dictionary and finding that, and then going to the page in the dictionary to find. That's a long-winded explanation.
Mine, and then we'll take another one here in person. Based on the ancient Chinese turtle concept and other similarities to Aboriginal cultural traditions, does this support that the Aboriginal people traveled to North America from China? Are there other things to support this theory in ancient astronomy that you're aware of?
The latest discoveries out of Alaska, archeological discoveries, suggest that the people who immigrated, who crossed the Beringia when it was dry land into North America, were most closely related to the northern Siberian people. But if you go far enough back, even further back, then we know that those people came from more western parts of Asia and had spread, as they had spread also to Southeast Asia and East Asia and Japan and the Philippines. So that if you go back far enough, the answer is yes. I even, my forebears came from probably Flanders and then Germany, but maybe Huguenot French. And I still have share a genotype with the branch of Siberians who split off. My ancestors 40,000 years ago, I don't want to say took a wrong turn because I ended up here 40,000 years later, but it would have been sooner if they had gone the other way.
Oh, just one at the back, and we'll take your question, and then we'll close down the presentation.
I'm sorry, I can't hear. Yes. Oh, okay, you refer to the Star of Bethlehem. That's one of the, there are a whole slew of interpretations of what that is a reference to. Some of them that it derived from a Babylonian record. I guess the reason why conjunction is a little bit problematical is that it moved rather significantly. Conjunctions, of course, take some time to come together and then to disperse. It's not sort of an instantaneous phenomenon, obviously. So that has been suggested as a possibility. But I can't think of any Chinese record of something spectacular around the turn of the millennium.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to note that we're looking at giving a presentation on the Christmas star in December, and we hope that you can make that. So stay tuned to social media channels and the library's webpage, and we hope to talk about that soon. I actually have my own question before we close off. I'm wondering if there are any portentous signs signaling the change from the Western Joe to the Eastern Joe, and were there any signs indicating the change from the spring and autumn period to the Warring States period, or no pun intended, or is that nebulous?
Well, the short answer is not that I know of. But this touches on the whether or not Pegasus was a horse in Chinese lore. It's very interesting that in the early years of the Han Dynasty, there was one reported in the Han histories in 205 BC. It occurred in 205, but it was misplaced in 206. But it was it was an alignment, what the Chinese refer to as strung pearls, marking the conferral of the mandate on the founding of the Han. Some 20 years later, there was a spectacular planetary conjunction in Ding, and it was not reported. And there were also 2 comets in that year that were not reported. This was the year, or this was during the control, the rule of the first emperor of the Han Dynasty's empress, after he passed away. She was quite a nasty person. And it was probably absolutely unthinkable, number one, for a woman to become emperor, and number two, for this particular woman to become the emperor. But she was very, very maneuvering to get her lineage into power. The historian Sima Qian writes about this period very interestingly. His only entry for this year is nothing important happened. So I'm working on the thesis that something important did happen, but it was suppressed.
Thank you very much for coming here tonight, David. We really appreciate that you attending here in Calgary to give this amazing presentation. It was a lot of fun, and I think we all learned a lot. So please give it up for Dr. David Pankenier.
Thank you very much.